So I just got home from Venom: The Last Dance. Obviously, it was probably one of the best films of all time. You know, the Venom trilogy as a whole is the GOAT. Unfortunately, we're not going to be talking about that today. I have another series to talk about that I like, but not quite as good as Venom. This is a booktube channel. It's all I can do. I don't know. Maybe we can do movies another turn of the wheel. Now, I've been wanting to make a Dark Tower video for a while, but I wasn't really sure when, until a few days ago when some developments happened that, you know, made me start thinking about it again. So today I want to introduce you all to the Dark Tower and sort of give my overview and review of the series. It will be spoiler free, so don't worry about that. But afterwards, I also want to talk about its current adaptation status and my thoughts and predictions on that entire situation. So folks, grab yourself a popkin and join me for some palaver. So for those completely unaware, The Dark Tower is Stephen King's sort of epic fantasy magnum opus. It's a series of 7 books. There was a side book released later, but that's not really relevant. We're not even going to talk about it. It's an alright book, though. And they were released from the early 80s to the early 2000s. Yes, took quite a while to come out and probably would have taken longer. But you see, the reason it's so backloaded here is because after Stephen King was hit by a car and almost died, he was like, alright, Probably should get off my ass and finish this. Now, in simple terms, yes, The Dark Tower is a fantasy series, but it is quite hard to really categorize and compare to other series because of just how wildly unique and different it is from probably anything you've ever read. The story is primarily set in Midworld, which is a world that used to be sort of like ours, a bit more magical, but it has since moved on. It's kind of like a post-apocalyptic magical nightmare world. And we follow Roland, who is the last of the gunslingers, an ancient order of knights who they shoot people. Roland is alone and he seeks the Dark Tower, a faraway mysterious structure that is said to connect everything. Not just the fabric of his world, but all worlds. What's the true purpose of the Dark Tower? Why is he seeking it? I'm not going to tell you, screw that. But he's not alone for long. As his wacky adventures continue, he meets all sorts of colorful characters, some of who join him on his quest. And they are not questing unopposed, as you have this evil force known as the Crimson King, who is sending his agents to stop them, because he does not want them reaching the tower. One of his more powerful minions being the Man in Black, who is sort of Roland's rival in the series. Probably got an image in your head what the series is like based on that synopsis. I guarantee you're wrong. Because it is very, very hard to pinpoint like what the Dark Tower really is. Like, yeah, we got this sort of post-apocalyptic fantasy adventure setting, but we also have a lot of elements more akin to American westerns, or high fantasy, urban fantasy, science fiction. This is a multiverse story. We are not only traveling with these characters across Midworld, but to other worlds and other times. But the series also offers what Stephen King is known for. We have a lot of horror elements here, a lot of suspense, and of course his character work is as top-notch as always. But I think it's even more effective with the Dark Tower because, you know, Stephen King characters, we usually only spend in one book with them. Here we got 7. We get to know these guys very well and you become very attached. Yeah, this is one that for sure has a bit of everything, but never in the way you would expect because, you know, this is also just one of the most out there things I've ever read. The ideas Stephen King comes up with here, man, every single book offers something completely unique and completely insane. And I think that's one of the reasons why this series, while popular and while acclaimed, always has people picking out a handful of ones that are their favorites and ones they didn't really care for as much. Very hard to find a consensus on this story because I think everyone who reads it will get something different out of it. My personal favorite is the 4th book, Wizard and Glass, which sort of stops everything we've been doing and just gives us a gigantic backstory arc for Roland. And while I loved it, some people absolutely hate that idea. Some people think the 1st book, The Gunslinger, is a masterpiece, while other people, including myself, think it's the worst of the series. But I think this phenomenon really just speaks to the variety and overall quality of the series. Everyone has their own favorites and least favorites, as every journey to the Dark Tower is different. Now, one thing that is commonly known about the Dark Tower is how it uses its multiversal concepts to sort of connect all of Stephen King's works. As you probably know, most of his books are set in the same world, and they often have Easter eggs and references to each other. Much like the actual Dark Tower, this series sort of serves as the pillar that connects them all. His books are full of mysterious and magical and terrifying things happening, and this series kind of contextualizes it a bit more. Helps you understand how King gets all of these ideas and how they all work together in all of his stories. And it's really quite fascinating. And it gets to the point where, we have characters from other books coming into the Dark Tower and actually being quite important to the story. And if you have an idea in your head of how that happens, once again, I guarantee you are wrong. Anyway, this feature of the series has led a lot of people to create their own Dark Tower reading lists. The books that you should read and should know before you read the Dark Tower. I've said before and I'll say again, I don't actually think you need to read any other books before the Dark Tower. Like, if you really want to read this series and just want to jump in, you can. Whenever characters and plot points from other books are relevant, the series does a good job sort of catching you up. That being said, if you have the time, you have the desire, you definitely should read more Stephen King before the Dark Tower. Not only because you'll get more out of the references and crossovers, but just have a better understanding of his writing style and how his stories work. I said before, I think the first book is the worst one. And yeah, this is a book that is infamously not very easy to get into. This series was clearly not planned out from the beginning, and this one is just kind of a weird mess. Not everyone thinks so. Personally, yeah, I always tell people if they don't really like The Gunslinger, please just read the second one. Because that's where you really start to see the vision for the series and I think grow far more attached. And I think it's more likely you'll do that if you are already familiar with Stephen King's work and what he can do. It also helps The Gunslinger is the shortest one. One very controversial aspect of The Dark Tower is, of course, its ending. Usually people either love it or hate it. I personally love it, but it's one of those instances where if someone hates it, I get it. I'm not gonna tell you you're wrong. Like, I fully understand how people get to the ending of this series and are not happy. But personally, I just find it so fascinating. It works so well with, the themes of the series. I just think it's so cool, and if you dig it, you're, really gonna want to reread the whole thing again. So yeah, it goes without saying, I absolutely recommend this series to fans of fantasy, fans of Stephen King's work. You kinda gotta be in both camps to really get the most out of the Dark Tower. Again, it's very weird, very unorthodox, but you just have such an entertaining journey with these characters that you will really grow to love. There's lots of action, there's so many creative ideas on display. You might not love every single book as much as the others, but I guarantee you will have a very unforgettable experience. Now, it wasn't that long ago, I'm sure most of you remember, that a Dark Tower movie came out. Now, this movie was quite different from the books, and I can't say anything about this, but let's just say there is a reason why this movie was so different from the books, and I actually think as a concept, it works. You'll only understand what I mean if you have finished the series, but yeah, I get what they were going for. That being said, this movie is dog shit, okay? I don't want to talk about it anymore. Absolute disaster. And the partial reason for that is just how hard of a series The Dark Tower is to adapt. It's extremely popular, so studios have always been trying to adapt it because that's what they do. But when they actually sit down to do it, they're like, "Oh, this is a nightmare." It's a series with so many odd elements that are just very difficult to translate to the screen. But there have been some very interesting developments in the past couple of years in regards to a Dark Tower adaptation, and currently the rights to adapt The Dark Tower sit with filmmaker Mike Flanagan. Now, if you're unaware with who Mike Flanagan is, you disgust me. Get out of here. In the past 10 years, he has made a real name for himself in the horror community with his movies and TV shows. He has released a lot of them. This guy is a workaholic. And what almost all of them have in common is they are fantastic. This guy is easily one of the best horror directors working today, and I think when we look back at his catalog, he will be seen as one of the greats of the genre. But there's something very interesting about his filmography, and I think it's how he often handles adaptation. Probably his most famous work is The Haunting of Hill House, an adaptation of Shirley Jackson's novel, which does not follow the novel at all. It's a completely original story, but still manages to weave together a narrative that honors and pays homage to the original book. And you could see him do a similar thing with Bly Manor, Midnight Club, and The House of Usher, where he took these stories and sort of remixed them and expanded upon them to work more in the framework of a streaming show. And then, of course, you have his Stephen King adaptations. Gerald's Game, Dr. Sleep, and the upcoming Life of Chuck, which has been getting rave reviews. Hell yeah. But the two movies I have seen, like, it is very clear that Mike Flanagan is a massive Stephen King fan. Because more so than almost any director I've seen do King stuff, he understands King. He understands why people love his books. It's clear he is a very big fan and very passionate about them. I mean, Gerald's Game and Dr. Sleep literally have Dark Tower references in them. This was way before he got the rights. He just did it for fun. And then, of course, you just have, like, his other stuff like Midnight Mass, which just feels like a Stephen King book come to life. Like, he's so good at what he does. So what I'm getting at here is, yes, I do think that Mike Flanagan is probably the best person on the planet that we know of who could tackle the Dark Tower. Just with his skill and previous success of adapting books to the screen and his deep understanding of Stephen King's work. But the Dark Tower is still no easy task, because it's also unlike anything Stephen King has ever done. And as of right now, we're not really any closer to this show actually getting off the ground. But there was a very interesting announcement recently. Okay, so Mike Flanagan, of course, has been producing shows for Netflix for the past, I want to say 6 years. But that contract eventually ran out, and he is no longer with Netflix. He actually moved over to Amazon Prime, which is where he is going to be producing his shows from now on. And we assume this is where the Dark Tower's home will also be, but in kind of a weird turn of events, just a few days ago it was announced that his first series for Amazon will be Carrie, an 8-episode television adaptation of Carrie. Now, so far he's just a producer, so we don't know if this will be like one of his full hands-on-deck projects or something like Bly Manor, where he only like partially does. But either way, this is going to be one that is essentially his vision. Some people are like, oh, well, Carrie already has a good movie. Why are we doing this? Shut up. There is a lot you can still do with Carrie that has not been brought to the screen before. I think it's actually a great book that could use Mike Flanagan's style of sort of remixing and expanding things. So overall, yes, I'm very excited for this prospect. But why? Why is this Why are we doing Carrie of all things? Especially if he has the rights to the Dark Tower. This is a bit of a crackpot theory, but hear me out. I think Mike Flanagan is going to build his own Dark Tower universe that he can pull things from. You see, one of the issues that has always come with adapting the Dark Tower is that, like, it's so reliant on other King stories, but the rights are scattered all over the place. You can't just pull random characters from random Stephen King movies. It doesn't work like that. But if you own the rights to a bunch, why not? Now, Carrie is not a character or a book that is relevant to the Dark Tower, but changes will have to be made to the Dark Tower no matter how good an adaptation is. And I think a lot of the crossover cameo characters are probably better replaced with other ones. Like, maybe we aren't just doing Carrie. Maybe he will be doing a bunch of Stephen King adaptations for Amazon, and then sort of all coming together for the Dark Tower. Now, I understand that's very insane and very hard to pull off in today's climate. I think probably the most likely reason that this Carrie series is happening is because Mike wants to make the Dark Tower, but Amazon does not trust him yet. They want him to prove himself first. I personally think he's done more than that, but this is how Hollywood usually works. And also, the Dark Tower show would be very expensive. Not like Rings of Power expensive, but if Amazon's going to spend all this money, I'm sure they want to guarantee it'll be a hit. Now, Mike has said that he envisions this as a 5-season show, which sort of goes again with what I was saying about you're going to have to make changes. I think it definitely starts with combining the first 2 books for season 1. Again, Gunn Gunslinger's a weird book. You can definitely remix it a bit to make it play a bit better on TV, and you'll want to get the second book in there to introduce more of our main characters and establish more of what the goal of the show actually is. From there, I think, the start and ending points of the season probably won't coincide with the books exactly, and I also think Wizard and Glass, which again is a gigantic backstory book, will definitely not be its own season. They are for sure going to split up the backstory throughout the whole show, because realistically, they are not going to make a season of a show that does not involve any of the main actors. That would just be absurd. And just the whole series is going to have significant changes. I mean, if you've read The Dark Tower, you understand this. I just think that Mike has really proven himself to be someone who understands that changes need to be made for adaptations, but can still respect the original source material. Godspeed, man. I wish you the best of luck on this endeavor. It may take, the rest of your life to get through it all, but I do think the series is in quite good hands. And with that was my piece. That's what I had to say. Thank you all so much for watching. You can leave your thoughts on anything Dark Tower related in the comments down below. Let me know if you saw Venom 3. Was it not the greatest thing you've ever seen? And I will be right back here on Halloween because I have read several spooky books this month and I'd like to get into them.